I let my brother-in-law use my pool every summer for his kids' parties. When I asked to borrow his tent for camping, he sneered, "Get your own damn stuff, you're pathetic." My father-in-law laughed, "Beggars can't be choosers." My wife added, "Stop being such a mooch." I returned from my trip to find my pool drained and damaged. His note said, "Pool parties are over. Maybe this will teach you not to be such a worthless leech." I simply said nothing, but what I did next left both their faces pale. I let my brother-in-law use my pool every summer for his kids' parties. When I asked to borrow his tent for camping, he sneered, "Get your own damn stuff, you're pathetic." My father-in-law laughed, "Beggars can't be choosers." My wife added, "Stop being such a mooch." I returned from my trip to find my pool drained and damaged. His note said, "Pool parties are over. Maybe this will teach you not to be such a worthless leech." I simply said nothing, but what I did next left both their faces pale. Thank you for being here. Please grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen as I tell you the whole story. I stood perfectly still on the edge of the concrete patio. The evening sun was casting long, jagged shadows across my backyard, but the warmth of the July air didn't register on my skin. I was entirely numb. The sound of my own breathing felt far away, drowned out by the roaring silence of a destroyed dream. My eyes tracked slowly over the devastation. The heavy, custom-fitted vinyl liner of my $40,000 in-ground pool, the pool I had worked 60-hour weeks for years to afford, was shredded. Huge, jagged tears ripped down the sides, exposing the raw earth and concrete beneath. The water, all 41,000 gallons of it, was completely gone. At the bottom of the deep end, resting in a pathetic puddle of muddy sludge, was my expensive automatic pool vacuum. It was smashed into 3 separate pieces, the internal motors exposed and ruined. Around the perimeter of the deck, my heavy cedar planters had been forcefully tipped over. Black potting soil and crushed geraniums were smeared across the pristine stamped concrete. One of the heavy metal patio umbrellas had been snapped completely in half, its canvas ripped and dangling like a broken wing. I felt a sharp ache in my jaw and realized I was grinding my teeth so hard my skull hurt. My hands were balled into tight fists at my sides. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stared. My wife, Sarah, was standing a few feet behind me, her hands clamped over her mouth. She was making small, choked whimpering sounds, but I blocked her out. I walked slowly toward the patio table. A rock had been placed squarely in the center of the glass top. Pinned beneath it was a piece of heavy cardstock. I pulled the note free. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was messy, arrogant, and sharp. It belonged to my brother-in-law, Carter. I read the words, and with every syllable, a cold, dark certainty settled into my chest. "Matthew, pool parties are over. Maybe this will teach you not to be such a worthless leech. You want to use people and never give anything back? Well, now you know how it feels to have something you care about taken away. Don't bother calling me. I'm done pretending to like you. Carter. P.S. The pool pump accidentally got unplugged while the kids were playing. Oops." I read it a second time, then a third. The sheer audacity of it burned through my veins. A worthless leech. He called me a worthless leech. This was a man who had treated my home like his personal country club for 4 years without paying a single dime. "Matthew." Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, Matthew. Call him. Call Carter right now. He needs to explain this. I can't believe he would do this." I didn't reach for my phone to call Carter. I didn't look at Sarah. I folded the note perfectly in half, then into quarters, and slid it into the front pocket of my jeans. I felt the sharp edges of the paper against my leg. It was the most valuable piece of evidence I had ever held. "I'm not calling your brother," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was completely hollow, stripped of any warmth or panic. "What do you mean you aren't calling him? Look at our yard," Sarah yelled, her panic turning into shrill hysteria. "He ruined everything. You need to scream at him. You need to call my parents." I turned to look at her. Sarah and I had been married for 8 years. For 8 years, I had swallowed my pride, bitten my tongue, and played the role of the accommodating husband to keep the peace with her incredibly toxic family. I looked at her wide, panicked eyes, and I felt absolutely nothing. The well of patience I had drawn from for nearly a decade was bone dry. I said, "I am not calling him," I repeated softly. "And you will not call him either. You will not call your mother. You will not call your father. You will not post about this on Facebook. If you pick up your phone to warn your family, Sarah, we are done." She flinched as if I had struck her. "Then what are you going to do?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I knew by heart. "I'm calling the police, and then I am going to destroy him." I had been silent for too long. But when a man finally decides to dismantle the life of his enemy, he doesn't need to shout. He just needs a plan. But to understand why this pool meant so much to me, and why Carter's note was the ultimate betrayal, you need to understand exactly what I went through to build this life. The police cruiser pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the front windows of my house, casting an eerie glow over the neighborhood. 2 officers stepped out, their heavy boots crunching on my gravel driveway. I met them at the side gate and walked them into the backyard. When they saw the empty, shredded pool, both of them stopped in their tracks. Officer Higgins, an older guy with a thick mustache, let out a low whistle. "Well, that is a hell of a mess, buddy. Vandalism, intentional destruction of property," I corrected him calmly. I handed him the folded note. The perpetrator left a written confession. Higgins read the note, his eyebrows rising toward his hairline. He handed it to his partner, a younger officer taking notes on a small pad. "Your brother-in-law did this?" Higgins asked, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Yes, sir." He admitted to unplugging the pump and draining the water. "The damage to the liner and the equipment is extensive. I've already called a pool maintenance company to get an official estimate of the damages, but it will easily exceed $15,000. That makes it a felony," the younger officer stated, looking up from his notepad. "Felony criminal mischief." "I am aware," I replied. "I want to file a full report. I want this documented immediately." Sarah stood by the back door, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. She looked terrified. Not of the police, but of me. She had never seen me like this. For years, I was the guy who smiled and nodded. I was the guy who paid the dinner bill when her father conveniently forgot his wallet. I was the guy who let her brother park his muddy truck on my clean driveway. She was waiting for me to back down, to say, "Let's just handle this within the family." I didn't. I gave the officers my statement word for word. I watched them take photographs of the broken vacuum, the torn liner, the shattered umbrella, and the spilled dirt. I made sure they photographed the exact spot where the note had been left. When they finally drove away, leaving me with a small white card containing the case number, the reality of the situation settled over the house like a thick fog. "You really filed a police report against my brother," Sarah whispered as I walked back into the kitchen. "He destroyed my property, Sarah. He committed a crime. The police are the appropriate people to handle crimes." I walked past her, went to the sink, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were perfectly steady. "My parents are going to lose their minds," she said, her voice shaking. "You know how my dad gets. He's going to say you're tearing the family apart over money." I took a slow sip of water. When my grandfather passed away, the funeral was the first time I noticed how Joseph, my father-in-law, controlled everything. He dictated the seating arrangements, he complained about the cost of the flowers, and he made sure everyone knew he considered himself the patriarch of the extended family. He ruled his family through financial manipulation and loud, aggressive bullying. Sarah was terrified of him. Carter was a cheaper, lazier copy of him. "Let your father say whatever he wants," I told her, setting the glass down. "He isn't going to save Carter this time. No one is." I walked down the hallway to my home office and locked the door behind me. I sat in my leather chair, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank screen. The rage was still there, a hot coal burning in my chest, but I was channeling it. I wasn't just going to fix the pool. I was going to make sure Carter paid for every single drop of water, every tear in the vinyl, and every ounce of disrespect he had thrown my way for the last 4 years. I opened a new encrypted file. I titled it Carter. People like Carter think they are untouchable because they rely on the social contract. They rely on the fact that decent people don't want to make a scene. They rely on the phrase, "but he's family," to act as a shield against the consequences of their actions. But the social contract was broken the minute he ripped the liner of my pool. He wanted to teach me a lesson about being a leech. I cracked my knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room. It was time to give my brother-in-law a masterclass in accountability. For years ago, this house was just a house. It had a big, empty, flat backyard composed mostly of stubborn weeds and dry dirt. But I had a vision. I work as a financial investigator for the state. It's a job that requires intense focus, sifting through hundreds of pages of bank statements, corporate tax filings, and ledger entries looking for discrepancies. My days are spent staring at numbers, dealing with fraudsters, and navigating tense legal interrogations. When I come home, I just want peace. I want a sanctuary. I saved for 3 years to build that sanctuary. I didn't buy a flashy car. I didn't take expensive vacations. I packed my lunch every single day. I used my latest promotion bonus to fund the landscaping. When I finally signed the contract with the pool installation company, it was the proudest moment of my adult life. I spent $40,000 on a beautiful, custom-designed in-ground pool. It had a deep blue liner that made the water look like an ocean, a stamped concrete deck that looked like natural stone, and underwater LED lighting that made the whole backyard glow at night. The first summer we had it, it was heaven. I would come home from a grueling day at the office, step into the cool water, and feel the stress wash right off me. It was my reward for playing by the rules and working hard. But my peace didn't last long. Carter is 3 years older than me, but he operates with the maturity of an entitled teenager. He bounces from job to job, always chasing some get-rich-quick scheme, always talking about a big deal that is just around the corner. He lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment downtown with his wife and their 2 kids, Nathan, who is 9, and Luke, who is 7. The weekend after the pool was finished, Carter showed up unannounced. He didn't knock. He just walked through the side gate, carrying a cheap plastic cooler, trailed by his 2 kids who were already wearing their swimsuits. "Hey man," Carter yelled, dropping the cooler onto my pristine new deck. Heard the rich guy finally got his pond finished. Figured we'd come break it in. I was sitting in a lounge chair reading a book. I looked up, surprised and immediately annoyed by the intrusion, but Sarah hurried out the back door, her face lighting up at the sight of her nephews. "Carter, you didn't tell us you were coming," she said, immediately grabbing towels for the boys. "Family doesn't need an invitation, right, Maddie?" Carter smirked at me, popping the top off a beer he'd pulled from his cooler. He didn't offer me one. I forced a smile. "Right? Sure. Just make sure the kids don't run on the wet concrete." That was my first mistake. Giving an inch to a man who takes a mile. That single unannounced visit set the precedent for the next 4 years. My backyard ceased to be my sanctuary. It became Carter's personal summer resort. He never asked if it was a good time. He would just send a text to Sarah on Friday afternoon. Not a request, a demand. "Pool party tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Nathan is bringing 3 friends from school. Make sure the filter is running." He treated us like the hired help at a country club. He would show up with a horde of loud, screaming children. He would commandeer my expensive gas grill, burning cheap hot dogs and leaving the grates coated in grease for me to scrub later. He would blast his terrible music from a Bluetooth speaker, completely ignoring the fact that I was inside trying to enjoy my weekend. The worst part was the mess. When the sun went down and Carter finally decided he had enough free entertainment for the day, he would pack up his cooler and leave. He never once offered to clean up. My yard would be littered with wet, sour-smelling towels, empty soda cans, and cheap plastic pool toys. One Sunday evening, after spending 2 hours fishing water balloons out of my expensive filtration system, I finally snapped. I walked into the kitchen where Sarah was loading the dishwasher. This has to stop, I said, dropping a handful of broken plastic toys into the trash can. He cannot keep treating our house like a public park. I want a weekend to myself. I want to swim in my own pool without hearing 12 children screaming. Sarah sighed, looking at me with that pleading, exhausted expression she always used when she wanted to avoid a fight with her family. Matthew, please, you know how much the kids love it. They don't have a yard at their apartment. It's just a few months a year. I don't care, I said firmly. I paid $40,000 for this. I work hard for it. He doesn't respect our property, and he doesn't respect me. Tell him he needs to ask permission before he comes over. Sarah promised she would talk to him, but she never did. Instead, the situation escalated, fueled by the two people who had created Carter's massive sense of entitlement, my in-laws. Dealing with Carter was exhausting, but dealing with Joseph and Martha, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, was suffocating. They treated Carter like he was a misunderstood genius and treated me like an arrogant outsider who didn't understand the meaning of family loyalty. Joseph was a retired car salesman. He wore too much cologne, talked too loudly, and believed that a man's worth was measured entirely by how much he bragged. He always bragged about Carter's imaginary salary from whatever new sales job Carter was failing at. Joseph acted like he was dangling a massive inheritance over our heads, demanding respect and obedience in exchange for the vague promise of future money. Martha was worse. She was the ultimate enabler, protecting Carter from any criticism with a shield of aggressive guilt trips. 2 weeks after I told Sarah to set boundaries with Carter, we had to attend a Sunday dinner at Joseph and Martha's house. I sat at the dining room table, quietly cutting my steak, while Carter held court, loudly recounting a story about some manager he had told off at work. "Good for you, son," Joseph boomed from the head of the table. "You don't let anyone disrespect you. A man has to demand what he's worth." Carter smirked, locking eyes with me across the table. "Exactly. Some guys just let people walk all over them because they're too scared to make waves. Right, Matthew?" I set my knife down carefully. "I think there's a difference between making waves and just being unprofessional, Carter." The table went dead silent. Martha gasped softly, dropping her fork onto her plate. Joseph's face darkened, a vein pulsing in his thick neck. "Unprofessional?" Joseph scoffed, pointing his butter knife at me. "Listen here, Matthew. You sit in a little cubicle all day pushing papers for the state. You don't know the first thing about the real business world. Carter is a hustler. He's out there making things happen. He's making a mess in my backyard every weekend. That's what he's making happen." I shot back, the frustration finally boiling over. I looked at Martha. "He brings half the neighborhood to my house, leaves garbage everywhere, and expects me to clean it up. I want it to stop." Martha looked at me as if I had just slapped her. "Matthew, how can you be so selfish? You have that huge, beautiful house. You have that fancy pool. You have no children of your own to provide for. Carter is struggling. The least you can do is share what you have with your own blood." "I'm not his blood," I said coldly. "And I'm not his babysitter. You are family." Joseph roared, slamming his fist on the table, making the glasses rattle. "Family shares. You think because you make a decent government paycheck you're better than us? Carter is struggling to put food on the table, and you're crying about a few wet towels? Grow up, Matthew. Stop acting like a spoiled brat." I looked at Sarah. I waited for her to defend me. I waited for her to say, "Actually, Dad, Matthew works very hard, and Carter is disrespectful." I waited for my wife to be my partner. Sarah looked down at her lap, her face flushed red. She picked at her napkin and said absolutely nothing. The betrayal stung worse than Joseph's insults. Carter sat across from me, a smug, triumphant grin plastered across his face. He knew he had won. He knew the family dynamic protected him. "Don't worry about it, Dad," Carter said, taking a loud gulp of his beer. "Matthew's just tight with his stuff. He doesn't get what it means to be a provider. I'll make sure to bring my own trash bags next time so the princess doesn't have to clean up." I stood up, threw my napkin on the table, and walked out of the house. Sarah followed me 5 minutes later, apologizing profusely the entire ride home, begging me to understand that her parents were just old school. But the damage was done. I realized that day that I was completely alone in my own marriage. I was a wallet, a host, a convenience. I wasn't a respected member of the family. For the next 3 years, I retreated. I worked longer hours. When Carter brought his circus to my house on Saturdays, I stayed in my office with noise-canceling headphones. I stopped arguing because arguing was pointless. I let the resentment build, layer by layer, compacting in the dark until it was hard as stone. Then came July, the breaking point. I was desperate for a break. The relentless heat, the stress of a massive corporate fraud case I was building at work, and the suffocating presence of my in-laws every weekend had pushed me to the edge of severe burnout. I needed to get away from the city, away from my phone, and most importantly, away from Carter. I booked a 5-day camping trip to Yellowstone National Park for Sarah and me. It was going to be our first real vacation in 2 years. I had mapped out the hiking trails, reserved a secluded campsite, and bought the plane tickets. The only thing we were missing was a high-quality camping tent. I knew Carter had one. 2 years prior, during one of his brief obsessions with outdoor living, he had dropped $400 on a top-of-the-line, 4-person, all-weather camping tent. He had taken his family camping exactly once, complained about the bugs the entire time, and the tent had been gathering dust in his apartment closet ever since. Carter should have put that money in a college fund for Nathan and Luke, but he was always obsessed with buying expensive gear to look the part. Just ask him to borrow it, Sarah suggested one evening as we were packing. He hasn't used it in years, and after all the times he's used our pool, he owes us. It made logical sense. A simple favor between family members. I didn't want to call him, but spending another $400 on a tent we might only use once seemed foolish. I picked up my phone and dialed Carter's number. He answered on the 4th ring, loud music thumping in the background. "What's up, Maddie? Make it quick, I'm busy." "Hey Carter. Listen, Sarah and I are heading out to Yellowstone next week for some camping. I remembered you had that big 4-person tent you bought a couple of years ago. We were wondering if we could borrow it for 5 days. I'll make sure it's cleaned and aired out before I return it." There was a pause on the line. The music in the background was muted as if he had walked into another room. When he spoke, his voice was dripping with absolute disdain. "Are you serious right now?" he sneered. I frowned, confused by the sudden hostility. "Yeah, I'm serious. We just need it for a few days. You want to borrow my expensive camping gear? Do you have any idea how much that tent cost me, Matthew? It was $400. That's professional equipment. I know what it cost, Carter, and we will take perfect care of it. If anything happens to it, I'll buy you a brand new one." "No," Carter barked. "The answer is no. Honestly, Matthew, you have a massive house, a $40,000 pool, a cushy state job, and you're calling me begging for camping gear? Get your own damn stuff. You're pathetic." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. "Pathetic? Carter, you have been using my pool, my grill, and my backyard every single weekend for 4 summers. You don't pay for anything. You leave a mess every time. And you're calling me pathetic for asking to borrow a tent you don't even use. A pool just sits there," Carter yelled, his voice rising in defensive anger. "It's not like you're actually giving me anything. It's water in a hole. My tent is valuable property. Could get ripped. Could get stolen. I'm not running a charity for tight-fisted bureaucrats. Buy your own tent." Before I could say another word, the line went dead. He hung up on me. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at my phone, my blood roaring in my ears. Couldn't breathe. The sheer, blinding hypocrisy of his words felt like a physical blow to the chest. A pool just sits there. Sarah walked into the kitchen, carrying a stack of hiking socks. "What did he say? Is he going to drop it off? Or do we need to go pick it up?" He said no. I gritted out, tossing my phone onto the counter. He said I was pathetic for asking. He said a pool is just water in a hole and his tent is valuable property. Sarah stopped, holding the socks to her chest. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. I waited for her to express outrage. I waited for her to pick up her phone and demand her brother apologize. Instead, she sighed. A long, weary sigh. Well, Matthew, you do make a lot more money than he does. It probably made him feel insecure that you were asking him for something. You know how prideful he is. We should just go buy our own. I stared at her. He insulted me, Sarah. After everything we've given him, he treated me like garbage. Stop making a big deal out of nothing. Sarah snapped, her patience suddenly evaporating. You always do this. You hold a grudge over the smallest things. Stop being such a mooch and just go to the sporting goods store. I'm sick of being caught in the middle of you two. Stop being such a mooch. My own wife, the woman I had sworn to protect, the woman I had built this life for, had just looked me in the eye and called me a mooch for asking to borrow a tent from a man who spent every weekend freeloading off my hard work. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a plate against the wall. I just felt a cold, dark curtain drop between us. I looked at Sarah, truly looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the person standing in my kitchen. She wasn't my partner. She was an extension of Joseph, Martha, and Carter. I'll go buy the tent, I said quietly. I drove to the store in complete silence. I bought a high-quality tent for $400. As I was standing at the checkout register, a thought struck me. Carter was perpetually broke. He was always dodging phone calls from collection agencies. How had he afforded a $400 tent 2 years ago when he couldn't even afford to fix the brakes on his truck? When I got home, Sarah was in the shower. I went into the home office and opened the filing cabinet where we kept our financial records. As an investigator, my brain is wired to look for financial anomalies. I pulled the credit card statements from 2 summers ago. I scanned the lines of charges, and there it was. A $435.50 charge at an outdoor sporting goods store. On Sarah's personal credit card. I pulled out my laptop and logged into our joint banking portal, tracing the payments. Sarah had paid off that specific credit card balance using money transferred from our joint checking account. Money that I had deposited from my paycheck. I sat back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs. The tent wasn't Carter's. He hadn't paid for it. When Sarah came out of the shower, wearing a bathrobe and drying her hair with a towel, I was standing in the bedroom holding the paper statement. You bought the tent, I said. It wasn't a question. Sarah froze, the towel pausing in her hair. Her eyes darted to the paper in my hand, and the color drained from her face. Matthew, You bought the tent 2 years ago, I repeated, my voice dangerously low. With my money. Why does Carter have it? Dad asked me to. She blurted out, her voice frantic. Dad's credit card was maxed out, and Carter really wanted to take the kids camping to prove he was a good dad. Dad asked me to just put it on my card, and he promised he would pay me back. He swore he would. Did he pay you back, Sarah? She looked at the floor. No, but it's family, Matthew. I couldn't say no to my dad. So, let me get this straight, I said, enunciating every single word. Your father manipulated you into buying a $400 tent for your brother. You used my money to pay for it. And when I asked to borrow the tent that I essentially paid for, your brother called me pathetic, your father called me a beggar, and you called me a mooch. Sarah started to cry. Large, dramatic tears rolling down her cheeks. I didn't want to start a fight. If I told you the truth, you would have been so mad at my dad. I was just trying to keep the peace. You didn't keep the peace, Sarah, I said, tossing the statement onto the bed. You just chose a side, and it wasn't mine. I stared at Sarah, wondering if a divorce was inevitable. The foundation of our marriage was entirely rotten. I packed my duffel bag for Yellowstone, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The next morning, as we were loading the car to leave for the airport, my phone rang. It was Joseph. I answered it, putting it on speakerphone so Sarah could hear. Matthew, Joseph's loud, booming voice echoed in the garage. Martha tells me you were harassing Carter about his camping gear last night. I asked to borrow a tent, Joseph, I said flatly. Well, Beggars can't be choosers, Joseph laughed. A harsh, grating sound. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, son. Carter works hard for what he has. He takes pride in ownership. You shouldn't be trying to leech off his success. Have a good trip. Try not to beg any park rangers for free food. He hung up. I looked at Sarah. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I didn't know it then, but leaving the house that day was the catalyst for the greatest destruction and the greatest rebuilding of my entire life. Yellowstone was beautiful. It was vast, untamed, and aggressively quiet. For 5 days, I hiked through pine forests, stood in the midst of massive waterfalls, and watched geysers erupt into the clear blue sky. It was exactly the physical escape I needed, but mentally, I was trapped. Sarah tried to act as if nothing had happened. She held my hand on the trails, pointed out wildlife with forced enthusiasm, and made small talk over the campfire at night. But every time I looked at her, all I saw was the credit card statement. All I heard was her voice telling me to stop being a mooch. We were sharing a tent, sharing meals, but we were miles apart. I used the quiet hours on the trail to think. I didn't just want to be angry anymore. Anger was exhausting. I wanted resolution. I realized that for 8 years, I had been playing a rigged game. Joseph, Martha, and Carter had designed a system where they took whatever they wanted, and if I objected, I was the villain. Sarah was their willing accomplice, sacrificing me to keep herself safe from her father's temper. I decided on the 3rd night, as I sat watching the embers of the campfire burn down to ash, that the game was over. When we got back, things were going to change. I was going to establish absolute, non-negotiable boundaries. No more unannounced visits. No more free rides. If Sarah couldn't accept that, then I would call a lawyer and file for divorce. I had made peace with losing the marriage if it meant saving my dignity. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me during the drive back to the airport. It was the calm of a man who has finally made a difficult, permanent decision. I was ready to walk into my house and take my life back. But I had underestimated Carter's malice. We landed late on a Thursday evening. We collected our bags in silence, caught an Uber, and drove through the dark streets of our suburban neighborhood. The house was exactly as we left it. The front lawn was manicured. The porch light was on. It looked like the perfect, peaceful home. I unlocked the front door, carried the heavy duffel bags into the hallway, and dropped them on the floor. I stretched my back, let out a long breath, and walked through the kitchen to the back door to check on the yard. I flipped the switch for the heavy outdoor floodlights. The backyard exploded into brilliant white light, and that was when I saw it. The empty, gaping wound in the earth where my pool used to be. The slashed vinyl. The broken equipment. The overturned planters. I froze, my hands still resting on the light switch. The sense of calm I had built in Yellowstone shattered instantly, replaced by a cold, violent shock. I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped out onto the patio. The scene I described in the beginning unfolding around me. The smell of damp, stagnant earth filled the air. After I found the note, after Sarah panicked, after I called the police and filed the felony report, I had to call the professionals. The police left at midnight. At 7 a.m. the next morning, I was standing in the backyard with Elijah. Elijah owned the company that had installed the pool. He was a master contractor, a guy who had been in the business for 30 years. He wore thick work boots and a faded baseball cap, and he didn't say a word for a full 5 minutes as he walked the perimeter of the destruction. He climbed down into the empty deep end, inspecting the jagged tears in the heavy blue vinyl. He knelt by the pump station, examining the exposed wires and the open drainage valves. When he finally climbed back out, his face was grim. "Matthew," Elijah said, pulling off his cap and scratching his head. "I've seen pools damaged by storms. I've seen them ruined by neglect. I have never seen a pool assassinated like this. How bad is it?" I asked, my voice steady despite the nausea churning in my stomach. "There's a total loss on the liner," Elijah explained, pointing down into the hole. "Whoever did this didn't just poke a hole. They took a blade, probably a box cutter or a heavy hunting knife, and dragged it along the sidewalls in 4 different places. Once the water started draining, the pressure change ripped it further. The automatic vacuum is smashed to hell. It looks like they threw your heavy patio chairs directly onto it. And the pump? They bypassed the safety failsafes. They unplugged the main circulation pump, opened the primary waste valve, and just let it bleed out into the storm drain system behind your fence. Probably took 2 full days to drain completely. Elijah pulled out a clipboard and started scribbling numbers. You need a completely new custom liner. The concrete shell needs to be acid washed and resealed because it's been exposed to the air and dirt. You need a new vacuum, new filters, and the plumbing needs to be pressure tested to make sure the sudden drainage didn't crack the PVC lines underground. He ripped the sheet off the clipboard and handed it to me. $28,000, Elijah said quietly. And that's a conservative estimate. I'm sorry, man. This is purely malicious. Someone hates your guts. I looked at the number. $28,000. It wasn't just the money. It was the violation. Carter had walked onto my property, stood on the deck I paid for, and systematically destroyed the thing that brought me the most peace. All because I asked to borrow a tent. Write up an official invoice, Elijah, I told him, folding the paper. Include a sworn statement outlining exactly how the damage was caused intentionally. I'm going to need it for the insurance company. And for the lawyers. While I was outside with Elijah, Sarah was inside completely falling apart. I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting on the floor, clutching her phone, her face streaked with mascara. He's not answering, she sobbed, looking up at me. Carter's phone goes straight to voicemail. I called Dad, but he hung up on me. I finally got Mom on the phone. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. And what did Martha have to say about her son committing a felony? Sarah swallowed hard. She said we are overreacting. She said Carter had a pool party here on Saturday while we were gone. Nathan and Luke had some friends over. She said the kids were playing rough, and someone must have accidentally kicked the plug out of the wall. She said the liner probably just ripped on its own because it was old. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. The liner was 4 years old, Sarah. It was commercial grade. And a kid doesn't accidentally open a high-pressure waste valve that requires a wrench to turn. A kid doesn't take a box cutter to the vinyl. And a kid didn't write the note. I know, Sarah cried, burying her face in her hands. I told her about the note. I read it to her. You know what she said, Matthew? She said Carter was just blowing off steam because you insulted him about the tent. She said if we try to make him pay for this, we will ruin his life, and she will never forgive me. There it was. The ultimate toxic shield. Carter commits the crime, but if I demand justice, I am the one ruining his life. Martha is right about one thing, I said, pushing off the counter. His life is about to be ruined. But he did it to himself. Matthew, please, Sarah begged, grabbing the hem of my jeans. Please don't go to the police again. Don't press charges. I will get a second job. I will pay for the repairs myself. Just don't put my brother in jail. My dad will have a heart attack. I looked down at the woman I married. She was willing to enslave herself to a second job just to protect the man who had gleefully destroyed our property. The conditioning ran so deep it was sickening. I'm not stopping, Sarah. I am going to push this as far as the law allows. If you want to stand in front of the train to protect him, that's your choice. But you will get run over with him. I stepped away from her, leaving her crying on the kitchen floor. I needed to gather more evidence. I needed to document everything before I called my lawyer. I walked through the house, checking every room to see if Carter had managed to get inside. The house was secure, but when I walked into the sunroom that overlooked the patio, I noticed something out of place. In the corner of the sunroom, tucked underneath a decorative pillow on the wicker sofa, was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It had a bright pink cover with a cartoon unicorn on it. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Sarah. She used it to keep track of her gardening schedule and household errands. But it was sitting in a weird spot. I picked it up and flipped it open. The first few pages were normal, grocery lists, reminders to call the plumber. But as I flipped toward the middle of the notebook, the handwriting changed. It wasn't Sarah's neat cursive. It was Carter's messy scrawl. He must have found it in the kitchen during one of his parties and used it because he forgot his own paper. I stared at the page, my eyes scanning the columns of names and numbers. July 12th, Nathan's birthday bash. Jackson, $50. Paid Venmo. Liam, $50. Paid cash. Sophia, $50. Pending. Oliver, $50. Paid Venmo. The list went on. There were 20 names. Below that, another page. July 19th, summer kickoff party, 15 kids and $50. Total is $750. Expenses, hot dogs $30, soda $20. Net, $700. My heart hammered against my ribs. The air in the sunroom suddenly felt thick and unbreathable. Carter wasn't just bringing his kids over to swim. He was running an unpermitted, unlicensed commercial business out of my backyard. He was hosting massive parties for other people's children and charging their parents $50 a head to use my pool, my water, my electricity, and my grill. He was pocketing hundreds of dollars every single weekend, all while drinking my beer and leaving the garbage for me to clean up. And the notebook belonged to Sarah. I marched out of the sunroom, the pink notebook gripped tight in my fist. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cold cup of coffee. I threw the notebook onto the table. It hit the wood with a loud smack. Sarah jumped, her eyes widening as she recognized it. "What is this?" I demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the open page. Sarah looked at the numbers, and the last remnants of color drained from her face. She looked like she was going to be sick. "Matthew, I can explain." "Explain?" I barked, my voice echoing in the kitchen. "Explain how your brother is charging $50 a head to rent out my backyard. And more importantly, explain why his ledger is in your notebook." She shrank back in her chair. He started doing it last summer. He said Nathan's friends really wanted to come over, but their parents felt bad sending them for free. So Carter told them he was running a weekend summer camp program. "And you knew about this?" The betrayal tasted like ash in my mouth. "I found out by accident," she cried. "I saw a mother hand him cash last August. I confronted him, Matthew, I swear, but he begged me not to tell you. He said he was so behind on his rent, and this was the only way he could make extra money. He promised he would only do it a few times. He used my property to run a business," I said, the words heavy and cold. "If one of those kids had drowned or slipped and cracked their skull on the concrete, who do you think those parents would have sued, Sarah? They wouldn't sue Carter. He has nothing. They would have sued us. We would have lost this house. You risked our entire financial future so your deadbeat brother could make a quick buck. I didn't think about it like that." "You didn't think about me at all," I roared, finally losing the tight control I had maintained. "You let him disrespect me. You used my money to buy his tent, and you let him run an illegal business on my property to line his pockets, while you stood in this very kitchen and called me a mooch." Sarah covered her face and sobbed. It wasn't a manipulative cry. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had completely destroyed her own life. I didn't comfort her. I didn't yell anymore. The anger had burned off, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. The kind of clarity I use when I'm building a fraud case against a corrupt CEO. I no longer viewed Carter as an annoying relative. I viewed him as a target, and Sarah was a compromised asset. I walked into our bedroom, grabbed a spare blanket and a pillow, and walked back out to the living room. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked weakly from the kitchen. "I'm sleeping on the couch," I said, not looking at her. "Tomorrow I am changing the locks on the doors. I am having a security system installed with cameras pointing at the front and back gates. If your brother steps foot on this property, he will be arrested for trespassing." "Matthew, we aren't discussing this anymore, Sarah. You chose to protect him. Now you get to watch what happens to him." I lay down on the couch, staring up at the ceiling. The house was dead quiet. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Instead, my brain went to work. I categorized the evidence. I mapped out the legal liabilities. Carter's little side hustle wasn't just a violation of my trust. It was a violation of city ordinances. It was a violation of the homeowners association rules. And most importantly, because I knew for a fact Carter didn't report a dime of that money, it was tax fraud. He thought he had taught me a lesson by draining my pool. But he had just handed a state financial investigator a fully documented ledger of his unreported income, right alongside a written confession to a felony property crime. He had handed me the rope, and I was going to tie the noose perfectly. The next morning, the house felt like a morgue. Sarah left early for work, her eyes puffy and red, avoiding my gaze completely. I took the day off. I had work to do. At 9 a.m., I was sitting in the polished mahogany conference room of Aaron Miller's law office. Aaron wasn't just my lawyer, he was a close friend. We played golf together. He knew my situation with Carter, and he had spent years telling me I needed to drop the hammer. I slid the police report, Elijah's $28,000 estimate, Carter's handwritten note, and photographs of Sarah's notebook across the table. Aaron picked up the note first. He read it, his eyes narrowing, then let out a sharp bark of laughter. Matthew, please tell me he actually left this at the scene of the crime. Pinned under a rock, I confirmed. He's an idiot. Complete, arrogant idiot, Aaron said, shaking his head. He looked over the estimate and the photos of the ledger. Okay, you have a few options here. We can file a civil suit immediately for the property damage. But honestly, given his financial history, getting blood from a stone is hard. We could win a $30,000 judgment, but he doesn't have the assets to pay it. I don't just want a judgment, Aaron. I want him to feel it. I want the pressure to squeeze him from every side. I want his safety nets destroyed. Aaron smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. I like where your head is at. First step, homeowners insurance. You file a claim today. You give them the police report, the estimate, and the note. It's an open and shut case of malicious mischief by a named third party. Your insurance will pay to fix the pool immediately. And then they go after Carter for the money I finished. Exactly. It's called subrogation. The insurance company's lawyers are much scarier than I am, and they have infinite resources. They will garnish his wages, put liens on his truck, and ruin his credit score until he pays back every cent of that 28 grand. I nodded. That handled the pool. What about the business he was running? Aaron tapped the photo of the notebook. This is beautiful. Operating a commercial enterprise on a residential property without permits. I suggest you make 2 phone calls this afternoon. One to Gabriel, the head of your HOA, and one to Wyatt down at City Planning. Carter was charging entry fees. That changes the legal definition of the gatherings. He wasn't having a family barbecue. He was operating an unpermitted commercial venue. I spent the rest of the day executing the plan. The insurance adjuster came to the house by noon. When I handed him Carter's note, the adjuster actually smiled. Mr. Mason, people usually try to hide insurance fraud. Your vandal literally signed his work. We'll have a check cut for the repairs by next week, and our legal department will initiate recovery protocols against Carter. Next, I met with Gabriel, the HOA president. Gabriel was a retired military man who hated noise complaints. When I showed him the evidence that Carter had been charging admission for those loud Saturday parties, Gabriel turned purple. Commercial activity is strictly forbidden in the bylaws, Matthew. I'm issuing a retroactive fine of $500 per event. Based on this ledger, that's $4,000 in HOA fines. Send the bill directly to Carter's address, I told him. He was the operator. Finally, I called Wyatt at the City Code Enforcement Office. Wyatt confirmed that running an unlicensed recreation business carried a steep municipal penalty. He opened a file on Carter that same afternoon. The walls were closing in, but I wasn't done. I was saving the best and most devastating weapon for last. That night, I locked myself in my home office. It was time to put my professional skills to work. Carter thought I was just a paper pusher. He had no idea how dangerous a man with access to financial databases could be. I booted up my encrypted work laptop. As a state fraud investigator, I have legal access to search public tax records, business registry databases, and cross-reference financial data for active investigations. I wasn't going to break the law, but I was going to look very closely at the public breadcrumbs Carter had left behind. I started with Venmo. Sarah's notebook showed that Carter received half his payments via the app. Carter's Venmo profile was public because he loved the attention. I scrolled back through his transaction history for the last 2 summers. Sure enough, dozens of payments from various parents. The captions were arrogant. Nathan's VIP pool bash, summer camp fee, water park access. But what caught my eye wasn't the payments from the parents. It was where Carter was sending the money after he collected it. He wasn't keeping it in his personal account. He was funneling large, even sums of money, $500 here, $1,000 there, to a user account named Apex Solutions LLC. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. Why was a broke guy transferring cash to an LLC? I opened the state business registry database and searched for Apex Solutions. The company was registered to a P.O. box downtown. The registered agent was a man named David Vance. My blood ran cold. David Vance. I knew that name. I knew it intimately. David Vance was the primary target of a massive, multi-million-dollar tax evasion and money laundering investigation my department had been building for 6 months. Vance ran a network of shell companies using small-time contractors to wash cash. I pulled up the active case file from my secure server and cross-referenced the data. Carter wasn't just throwing parties. He was working as a low-level cash collector for Vance. Vance probably promised Carter a cut or a way to hide his assets from debt collectors by funneling it through the LLC. Carter was taking the cash he scammed off the pool parties, mixing it with whatever other shady money he was moving for Vance, and passing it up the chain. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. I let out a low, disbelieving laugh. Carter had inadvertently tied his petty, spiteful revenge plot directly into a major state felony investigation. He was swimming with sharks and he thought he was the apex predator. If I reported his unreported income from the pool parties to the IRS, he would get hit with a nasty tax bill. But if I submitted my findings, the Venmo logs, the connection to Apex Solutions, to my department director, Carter wouldn't just be facing fines. He would be facing federal indictments for conspiracy to commit money laundering. If Carter went to prison, his ex-wife would get full custody of Nathan and Luke, and his life would effectively be over. I had the kill shot loaded in the chamber. I just needed the perfect place to pull the trigger. I didn't want to just send an email and let the cops arrest him quietly. I wanted him to see it coming. I wanted Joseph, who had mocked my salary and my career, to watch his hustler son get dismantled by the exact job he had ridiculed. I wanted Martha to see the monster she had created. I picked up my phone. It was 11 p.m., but I knew the man I was calling would be awake. I dialed Charles. Charles was Sarah's uncle, Joseph's older brother. He was a retired state court judge. Unlike Joseph, Charles was a man of immense integrity, quiet power, and zero tolerance for nonsense. He was the only person in the family that Joseph genuinely feared, because Charles held the key to the family trust, the inheritance Joseph was always banking on. "Matthew?" Charles answered, his voice gravelly and calm. "It's late. Is everything all right with Sarah?" "Sarah is fine, Charles," I said. "But everything else is not. I need your help. I need you to call a mandatory family meeting this Sunday at your house." "A family meeting? Why?" "Because Carter destroyed my pool, caused $28,000 in damages, and left a note confessing to it. And I am about to ruin his life. I want Joseph and Martha to see the evidence before the police show up at their door." There was a heavy silence on the line. Then, Charles sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "Bring the evidence, Matthew. Sunday at 2 p.m. I will make sure they are all there." I hung up the phone. The trap was set. The storm was coming, and I was holding all the lightning. Sunday morning felt entirely different than any other Sunday in my life. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of a broken marriage or the anxious quiet of waiting for Carter to show up and ruin my day. It was the sharp, focused quiet of a man preparing for a surgical strike. I woke up early, showered, and put on a crisp button-down shirt and slacks. I didn't dress like I was going to a family barbecue. I dressed like I was walking into a courtroom. I packed my leather briefcase with meticulous care. Inside were the police report, Elijah's official repair estimate, the pink notebook with Sarah's handwriting and Carter's ledger, the HOA violation notices, the Venmo transaction logs, and the state tax registry files tying Carter to David Vance. Every single piece of paper was a nail in his coffin. Sarah stood in the hallway, watching me click the brass locks of the briefcase shut. She looked exhausted. She hadn't slept in days. The word divorce had been hanging silently in the air between us all weekend. It was a heavy, invisible weight, pressing down on every interaction. "We're really doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her, my expression completely neutral. "I am doing this," I corrected her. "You are coming as a witness. You can either stand by me and watch the truth come out, or you can stand by them. But there is no middle ground anymore, Sarah. You make your choice today." She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't argue. We drove to Charles's house in complete silence. Charles lived in a massive, sprawling stone estate in the wealthiest suburb of the city. He was a retired state court judge, a man who had built a formidable reputation and a massive fortune. Joseph, my father-in-law, had spent his entire adult life brown-nosing Charles, desperately hoping to secure a large inheritance when the time came. Joseph treated Charles with the kind of trembling respect he demanded from everyone else. That was exactly why I chose Charles to moderate this execution. When we pulled into the long, circular driveway, I saw Joseph's leased Cadillac and Carter's muddy pickup truck already parked out front. "They're here," Sarah said, her hands shaking as she unbuckled her seatbelt. "Good," I said, grabbing my briefcase. "Let's go." We walked up the wide stone steps, and Charles's housekeeper let us in. We were guided to the formal living room. It was an intimidating space, with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and walls lined with heavy legal volumes. It wasn't a room designed for casual family banter. It was a room designed to make you feel small. Carter was sitting on one of the expensive leather sofas, his feet propped up on the mahogany coffee table, casually drinking a bottled beer. Joseph was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Martha was sitting nervously on the edge of a wingback chair, twisting her wedding ring. The moment I walked in, the atmosphere shifted. Carter smirked, taking a slow sip of his beer. "Look who finally showed up," Carter sneered. "The mooch. Thought you were too busy filing police reports against your own family to come to Sunday dinner." I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at him. I walked straight to the large oak dining table at the edge of the room, set my briefcase down, and waited. Joseph let out a loud, grating laugh, the ice clinking in his glass. "Matthew, I heard about your little tantrum with the police. You make a decent salary working for the state, but you have absolutely no idea how loyalty works. A man protects his family. He doesn't go crying to the cops because a pool liner got a little tear in it. You're embarrassing yourself." Before I could respond, the heavy oak doors of the study opened, and Charles walked in. He didn't look like a warm, welcoming uncle. He wore a dark tailored suit, his face set in deep, severe lines. He walked to the center of the room and looked directly at Carter's boots resting on his expensive coffee table. "Get your feet off my furniture, Carter," Charles commanded, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Carter scrambled to drop his feet, suddenly looking like a scolded child. "Sorry, Uncle Charles." Charles didn't offer anyone a drink. He didn't ask how our week was. He simply gestured to the leather chairs arranged in a semicircle. "Sit down," Charles said. "All of you. We have a very serious matter to discuss, and nobody is leaving this room until it is resolved." The smug smiles vanished from Joseph and Carter's faces. They sat. The trap was sprung. The room was dead silent, save for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. I stood next to Charles. Sarah sat as far away from her parents as she possibly could, her eyes glued to the floor. Charles walked over to my briefcase. I unlatched it and handed him the first manila folder. Charles opened it slowly, letting the suspense stretch out. He pulled out the police report and Elijah's invoice. "Carter," Charles began, his tone purely judicial. "I have reviewed a police report filed on Thursday night, along with a certified contractor's estimate. It appears you trespassed onto Matthew and Sarah's property and intentionally destroyed their swimming pool." Carter rolled his eyes, a nervous twitch starting in his jaw. "Uncle Charles, it's a huge misunderstanding. The kids were playing rough. Someone must have accidentally kicked the plug out of the wall. It's just a pool. Matthew is just being a cheapskate and trying to pin a $28,000 renovation on me." Martha immediately jumped to his defense. "Charles, you know how boys are. Matthew insulted Carter over a camping tent, and now he's trying to ruin my son's life over an accident. It's vindictive." Charles held up a single hand, and Martha snapped her mouth shut. He reached into the folder and pulled out the piece of heavy cardstock. Carter's note. "An accident," Charles repeated flatly. "I spent 30 years on the bench presiding over criminal cases. I have seen every excuse in the book. But rarely do I see a criminal stupid enough to leave a signed confession at the scene of a felony." Charles read the note aloud. Every single word. "Pool parties are over. Maybe this will teach you not to be such a worthless leech." As Charles read the words, Joseph's face turned a deep shade of crimson. Even he realized how incredibly foolish his son had been. "You wrote this, Carter?" Charles asked, dropping the note onto the table. Carter swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I was just mad. Okay? He was disrespecting me. I just wanted to drain the water to teach him a lesson. I didn't know the liner would rip. I'm not paying 28 grand for a stupid mistake." "It's not a mistake. It is felony criminal mischief," Charles stated coldly. "In my courtroom, you would be looking at jail time. Matthew has already filed a claim with his homeowner's insurance. They are going to repair the pool, and then their legal department is going to come after you for the full amount. They will garnish your wages. They will put a lien on everything you own." "Dad," Carter panicked, looking at Joseph. Tell him they can't do this." Joseph puffed out his chest, trying to salvage the situation with his usual bullying tactics. "Now listen here, Charles. We keep things in the family. Matthew needs to drop this insurance claim right now. We'll patch the stupid pool ourselves. You don't take family to court." "I am not taking him to court, Joseph," I finally spoke, stepping forward. My voice was calm, steady, and loud enough to command the room. "The insurance company is, and honestly, the $28,000 for the pool is the least of Carter's problems." Carter sneered at me, trying to regain his false bravado. "What are you talking about, you paper-pushing loser? You think you scare me?" I opened my briefcase again. I pulled out Sarah's pink notebook, the thick stack of Venmo logs, and a manila envelope sealed with a red state insignia. I tossed the pink notebook onto the coffee table right in front of Carter. "Let's talk about the business you've been running on my property," I said. Carter looked at the notebook, and all the blood instantly drained from his face. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. "You've been charging $50 a head to host parties in my backyard," I continued, pacing slowly in front of him. "You charged admission. You operated a commercial recreation facility in a residential zone without a permit. The Homeowners Association has already issued $4,000 in fines, which are being mailed directly to your apartment. The City Planning Commission has opened a code violation case against you." Martha gasped, pressing her hands to her chest. "Carter, you were charging people money? I just needed to cover the cost of the hot dogs." Carter stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. "It wasn't a real business. It was real enough to bring in hundreds of dollars a weekend," I snapped. "But that's just local code enforcement. That's just civil penalties." I picked up the manila envelope with the red state seal. I didn't hand it to Charles. I held it up for Carter to see. "You called me a paper-pushing loser, Carter. You and your father have spent 4 years mocking my state job, mocking my salary, treating me like an idiot because I don't brag about my hustle at the dinner table. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out my heavy brass badge and leather credentials. I threw them onto the table next to the note. They landed with a heavy, undeniable thud. I am a senior financial fraud investigator for the State Department of Revenue, I said, letting the title echo in the quiet room. I investigate corporate embezzlement, tax evasion, and organized financial crime. Joseph stopped breathing. He stared at the badge as if it were a live grenade. I looked dead into Carter's terrified eyes. When I looked through your Venmo history to see how much money you made off my pool, I noticed you were transferring large sums of cash to an LLC called Apex Solutions. You were funneling money to a registered agent named David Vance. Carter physically recoiled, pressing himself deep into the leather sofa. He started shaking. How do you know that name? Carter whispered. Because David Vance is the primary target of a multimillion-dollar federal money laundering and tax evasion case that my department has been building for 6 months. I said, leaning in close so he could hear every single word. You weren't just running a fake summer camp, Carter. You were acting as a cash mule for a felony money laundering ring. You mixed the illicit cash you made off my property with whatever dirty money Vance gave you, and you washed it through his shell company. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a man's life completely evaporating. You're lying, Carter choked out, his voice cracking. I didn't know what he was doing. Vance just said he could help me hide some cash so my ex-wife wouldn't find it for child support. I didn't know it was illegal. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Charles interjected, his voice dripping with disgust. You tried to hide assets to avoid supporting your own children? You are a disgrace to this family. I tapped the sealed envelope. This envelope contains your Venmo logs, the party ledger, and your transaction history with Apex Solutions. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I am walking into the director's office, and I am handing this over. It will be forwarded to the IRS and the federal prosecutor handling the Vance case. They are going to audit every single dime you have ever touched. They will freeze your bank accounts. And when Vance goes down, he will absolutely sell out his low-level mules to get a plea deal. Matthew, please, Carter screamed, suddenly throwing himself off the sofa and dropping to his knees on the Persian rug. The arrogant, smug bully was gone. He was crying hysterically, his face red and splotchy. Please, I'll go to prison. I can't go to prison. I'll pay for the pool. I'll do anything. Please don't give them the file. I looked down at him. For years of disrespect. For years of cleaning up his garbage. For years of being called a mooch, a beggar, and a pathetic leech. This is the moment that changes everything. The moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I looked at Carter groveling on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity. You wrote that you wanted to teach me a lesson, I said softly, looking down at him. You wanted me to know how it feels to have something I care about taken away. Well, Carter, lesson learned. Now I'm teaching you yours. The files go to the director tomorrow. You better find yourself a very good criminal defense lawyer. I turned away from him and looked at Joseph. My father-in-law was pale, sweating profusely through his expensive golf shirt. The patriarch who loved to bully everyone was suddenly completely powerless. He looked at Sarah, panic etched into his face. Sarah, honey, Joseph pleaded, his voice trembling. Talk to your husband. He can't do this to your brother. It's family. We can fix this. Put the pool repairs on your credit card. We will pay you back. I swear to God. We just need to keep the cops out of this. I didn't let Sarah answer. I reached into my briefcase one last time and pulled out the credit card statement from 2 years ago. The charge for the $400 camping tent. I walked over to Joseph and shoved the paper against his chest. You mean exactly like you promised to pay her back for this? I demanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. The $400 camping tent you forced your daughter to buy with my money, so you could give it to your deadbeat son? The same tent you mocked me for asking to borrow? Joseph stumbled backward, clutching the paper. That was different. I was just a little short on cash that month. Charles stood up from his chair. The former judge looked at his younger brother with a mixture of rage and absolute contempt. You stole from your own daughter, Joseph, Charles said, his voice lethal. You manipulated her into stealing from her husband to fund Carter's delusions of grandeur. You have spent your entire life puffing out your chest, pretending to be a self-made man, while acting like a parasite on anyone foolish enough to let you close. Charles, please, Martha sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Don't say these things. We are a family. Not anymore, Charles snapped. He pointed a finger directly at Joseph's face. Listen to me very carefully, Joseph. You have always banked on getting a massive payout from the family inheritance when our mother's trust pays out next year. As the executor of that trust, I am telling you right now, I am legally restructuring it. You and Carter are being cut out completely. Every single dime that would have gone to you is going directly into a locked trust for Nathan and Luke. You will not see a single penny of this family's money ever again. Joseph let out a strangled gasp, clutching his chest as if he were actually having a heart attack. The inheritance, the ultimate trump card he always held over everyone's head, was gone in a matter of seconds. I picked up my briefcase and snapped it shut. This meeting is over, I announced. I looked at Joseph, Martha, and Carter. None of you will ever step foot on my property again. If you call my phone, I will log it as harassment. If you come to my house, you will be arrested for trespassing. Enjoy the audits. I turned and walked out of the study. I didn't look back to see if Sarah was following me. I walked out the heavy front doors, down the stone steps, and stood by my car. A minute later, the front door opened, and Sarah ran out. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. She practically collapsed against the side of the car, grabbing my arm. Matthew, she gasped, her voice broken. I am so sorry. Oh my God. I am so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know how bad they were. I was so blind. Please don't leave me. I will do whatever it takes. We can go to counseling. I will cut them off completely. Just please don't file for divorce. I looked down at her. For the first time in our 8-year marriage, she had actually stood by my side instead of shielding her toxic family. The spell Joseph had over her was broken. She saw them for the parasites they truly were. Get in the car, Sarah, I said quietly. We have a lot to talk about. 3 months later, the suffocating heat of July had given way to the crisp, cool air of October. My backyard was a masterpiece. The insurance company had paid out the claim with lightning speed once their subrogation lawyers saw Carter's note. I hired Elijah to rebuild the pool, and I used some of my own savings to upgrade it. The new vinyl liner was a deep, sparkling midnight blue. The deck was expanded, the planters were replaced, and I had a state-of-the-art security system installed with cameras covering every inch of the perimeter. It was peaceful. It was finally my sanctuary. The fallout from that Sunday meeting at Charles's house was absolute and devastating. True to my word, I handed the files over to my director. The state tax board and the IRS descended on Carter like vultures. When the state investigators showed up at the logistics company where Carter was working his new hustle, he was fired on the spot. The company didn't want any association with a federal money laundering probe. The IRS froze his bank accounts pending a full audit of his unreported income. Because his accounts were frozen, he couldn't make rent. He couldn't pay his truck loan. His beloved, oversized pickup truck was repossessed in the middle of the night. He was forced to move into a tiny, run-down studio apartment on the bad side of town. But the most brutal consequence came from his ex-wife. When she found out Carter was facing potential felony indictments for his involvement with Apex Solutions, she didn't hesitate. She hired a ruthless family lawyer and filed an emergency petition for full custody of Nathan and Luke. The judge granted it immediately, citing Carter's impending legal battles and unstable living situation. Carter lost the right to see his own kids without supervised visitation. The money he had scammed from my pool parties, the money that should have gone into a college fund for his boys, was entirely eaten up by the retainer for his overworked public defender. And the social consequences were just as satisfying. Word travels fast in the suburbs. Gabriel, the HOA president, and Samuel, the annoying neighbor who used to drink my beer at Carter's parties, found out about the felony charges. More importantly, they found out what I actually did for a living. Suddenly, the guys who used to ignore me were bending over backward to be my friend. Samuel actually walked over to my fence one Saturday afternoon holding an expensive bottle of wine. "Hey, Matthew," Samuel called out, leaning over the fence with a forced, overly friendly smile. "Man, I heard what happened with Carter. That guy was always a bad egg. Good thing you got rid of him. Listen, I'm hosting a barbecue next weekend. Some high-end clients. I'd love for a state investigator of your caliber to drop by. We could talk business." I looked at Samuel. I remembered him laughing when Carter called me a tightwad last summer. "I don't drink wine, Samuel," I said, not getting up from my lounge chair. "And I don't socialize with people who participated in an unlicensed commercial operation in my backyard. Have a good barbecue." I watched the smile fall off his face as he awkwardly backed away from the fence. It felt incredible to finally establish boundaries and watch people respect them out of pure fear. But amidst all the righteous vengeance, there was one casualty I hadn't anticipated. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. "Hello? Uncle Matthew?" A small, trembling voice said through the speaker. I sat up straight. "Nathan." "Yeah, it's me," my 9-year-old nephew sniffled. He sounded like he had been crying for hours. "Mom said I could call you. Uncle Matthew, my dad says we can never go swimming at your house again. He said you're evil and you ruined his life. Are you mad at me and Luke? Did we do something wrong?" My heart shattered in my chest. These two little boys were innocent. They were collateral damage in a war their father had started out of pure ego. They didn't understand tax fraud or property damage. They just knew their favorite summer activity was gone, and their father was blaming me. "Nathan, buddy, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice softening completely. "You and Luke did absolutely nothing wrong. You were good boys. Your dad and I had a very serious disagreement about how adults should treat each other's property. He made some very bad choices, and he has to face the consequences. But I am not mad at you. I will never be mad at you." "But we can't swim anymore?" he asked, his voice breaking. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Carter deserved to suffer. He deserved everything happening to him. But a good man doesn't punish children for the sins of their father. "Let me talk to your mom," I said. His ex-wife got on the phone. We talked for 20 minutes. I explained that while Carter was permanently banned from my property, I didn't want the kids to suffer. I made an offer. That Saturday, I pulled my SUV up to the curb of Carter's rundown apartment building. The custody agreement stated Carter had supervised visitation for 2 hours on Saturday mornings. His ex-wife had arranged for the pickup to happen during his window, specifically so he could see it. Nathan and Luke ran out the front door, wearing their swim trunks, carrying brightly colored towels. They practically tackled me in the driveway, hugging my legs. "Ready to go, guys?" I asked, smiling down at them. "We're going to the massive indoor community pool across town. The one with the water slides." "Yeah." They cheered, climbing into the back seat. I closed their doors and looked up. Carter was standing on the second-floor balcony of his apartment complex. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, wearing a stained t-shirt, his face sunken and exhausted. He gripped the metal railing, staring down at me with a look of pure, impotent rage. He couldn't say a word. If he caused a scene, it would be reported to the family court judge and he would lose his visitation rights entirely. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just looked him dead in the eye, gave a single, slow nod, and got into my car. I drove away, taking his children to do the one thing he could no longer provide for them: a safe, happy afternoon. I took that power right out of his hands. It's late evening now. I'm sitting on the patio, the underwater LED lights of the pool casting a beautiful, rippling blue glow against the side of the house. The water is perfectly still. The sliding glass door opens and Sarah steps out. She's carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She hands one to me and sits in the chair next to mine. Sarah is a different person now. The shock of that Sunday meeting, the reality of her father's theft and her brother's criminal behavior, broke the toxic conditioning she had lived under her whole life. She started going to therapy twice a week. She changed her phone number so Joseph and Martha couldn't contact her with their endless guilt trips. She finally realized that a marriage requires 2 people protecting each other against the world, not one person sacrificing the other to keep a fake peace. It hasn't been easy, and we still have a lot of work to do, but for the first time in 8 years, I actually feel like I have a wife who has my back. We survived because the cancer was finally cut out. I take a sip of the hot coffee, looking out over the water. In the garage, neatly packed in its carrying case, is the $400 camping tent. The tent that started this entire cascade of destruction. We've used it 3 times since the Yellowstone trip. We go camping just the 2 of us, far away from cell service and family drama. That tent has become a symbol for me. It's a reminder that I don't have to ask anyone for permission to live my life. It's a reminder of my own independence. People often confuse kindness with weakness. They think that if a man is quiet, if he works a steady job, pays his taxes, and avoids conflict, he is a pushover. Carter thought I was a pushover. Joseph thought I was a coward. They didn't understand that the quietest men are often the ones building the strongest foundations. And when you try to crack that foundation, you don't find dirt. You find steel. I used to think that being the bigger person meant letting things slide. I thought swallowing my anger and cleaning up the mess was the noble thing to do. But I learned a very hard lesson this summer. Being a good man doesn't mean letting people use you as a doormat. True goodness, true protection of your family and your peace, requires you to have sharp teeth. You don't have to bite everyone, but you must be absolutely willing to tear someone apart if they threaten what you have built. Carter wanted to teach me a lesson about being a worthless leech. Instead, I gave him a masterclass on the devastating consequences of waking up a sleeping bear. My yard is clean, my pool is pristine, and my life is finally my own. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long one, but sharing it helps me process everything that happened. I hope this resonated with you in some way. We all have those people in our lives who push boundaries, who take and take until there's nothing left. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic family member and establish a boundary that changed everything? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And before you go, I want to do something special. If you are hearing my voice right now, that means you stayed until the very end. You understand the value of patience and the satisfaction of standing up for yourself. I want you to go down to the comments right now and type the letter W. Just a single W. It stands for winner. This is the secret code for the 1% Club, the amazing group of people who actually finish the stories they start. When I see that W, I'll know you were here with me. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and make sure to follow the channel so we can continue sharing these journeys together. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.